Before we start the story, let me tell you something important. Hi, I'm Isaac Newton. If you don't subscribe, I'll personally add another formula to your exam.
Have you ever walked into a room full of your own family and realized they were happier to see you fail than succeed? The air in the Magnolia Grand Ballroom was thick with jasmine perfume and the soft clinking of champagne flutes, a glittering facade laid over the kind of tension you could taste. Golden light poured down from crystal chandeliers, catching on sequined dresses and polished cufflinks, bouncing off the marble floors like everyone in the room had been dipped in money. It was my sister Sophia's rehearsal dinner. Historic Houston venue. Velvet drapes. Oil paintings on the walls that probably cost more than my first year of rent combined. The kind of place where the waiters move like ghosts and the silverware is heavier than your average person's conscience. I, Emily Harper, hadn't set foot at a family event in 3 years. Not since the night my father, Richard Harper, had stood in the doorway of our River Oaks mansion and told me to get out. Not since he'd made it crystal clear that I was no longer his daughter, just a stain on the family name. That night I'd left with a duffel bag, a cracked phone, and a heart ripped open so wide I could hardly breathe. But tonight I was back. I stood at the threshold of the ballroom, fingers wrapped around a rectangular gift box. Silver paper. Clean edges. A ribbon tied so precisely it could have been measured with a ruler. My palms weren't sweating. My hands weren't shaking. I'd already lived through the worst they could do to me. I was 32 now. A self-made jewelry designer with a thriving business, a beautiful home, and a husband who actually knew what respect meant. I hadn't come here to beg. I hadn't come to be forgiven. I hadn't come to plead my way back into a family that had chosen to throw me away. I'd come back for something else entirely. Reckoning. The moment I stepped inside, my father's voice sliced through the gentle hum of small talk and the soft notes of the string quartet like a whip. Look who decided to crawl back. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His tone carried across the room with the ease of a man used to being obeyed, feared, and never questioned. The violinist hit a wrong note and then stopped. Conversations died mid-sentence. Laughter cut off like someone had hit pause on the entire evening. Heads turned one by one like a row of dominoes tipping over, and every gaze in that lavish room landed on me. Richard Harper stood by the cake table, broad-shouldered, graying at the temples, his tuxedo fitting him like it was sewn directly onto his skin. He looked exactly the same and yet somehow smaller, less mythical. The spell of my childhood had long broken. His eyes were as cold as ever. "Well," he said, "don't just stand there." I took another step, my heels clicking against the polished oak floor. Before I could say a word, he stalked toward me, his steps long and purposeful. He stopped in front of me, close enough that I could smell his cologne. Sharp, expensive, familiar in a way that made my stomach twist, and without breaking eye contact, he reached for the gift in my hands. For half a second, you might have thought he was doing the polite thing, taking it to place on the gift table like a normal father would. But Richard Harper had never been a normal father. He snatched the box from my fingers, held it up for everyone to see like it was evidence in a trial, and then, with a flick of his wrist, hurled it into the trash can beside the cake table. It hit the plastic liner with a muffled thud. "We don't need your pity money, Emily," he said, loud enough for the waitstaff at the far wall to hear. "Here to beg for a seat at the table, are you?" Few people gasped. Some looked away. Some watched openly, eyes gleaming, hungry for the drama. There's always a few who live for that. And then the laughter started. Not from strangers. From my family. Sophia, standing not far from him in her ivory rehearsal gown, brought a manicured hand to her mouth as she tried to hide a giggle behind her champagne flute. Her emerald eyes sparkled, not with joy, but with the same smug satisfaction I remembered from 3 years ago. Like my humiliation was a show she'd paid extra to see front row. My mother, Catherine, in her navy silk dress and pearl earrings, turned toward a nearby floral arrangement as if the white roses suddenly needed her full attention. Her spine stiffened. I saw her see me, and then choose not to. The guests watched like a flock of well-dressed vultures, their curiosity draped in politeness. Houston's elite. Family friends. Cousins who hadn't answered a single one of my messages when I left. They stared at me like I was a car accident in the middle of the freeway. Horrible but impossible not to look at. I didn't flinch. Not a tear. Not a blink. I'd already cried enough for these people. I let the silence stretch just long enough for every eye to stay fixed on me. Then I smiled. Slowly. Deliberately. The kind of smile that says, "You think you know how this scene ends. Don't. Open the card before you choke on your pride, Dad," I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The words slid through the silence, clean and sharp. Sophia's smirk faltered. She tilted her head, curiosity slipping through the cracks of her superiority. The string quartet remained frozen, instruments in hand, as if waiting for the cue to start playing again and not sure they'd get one. Richard's jaw clenched. His nostrils flared just slightly. For a moment, I saw the calculation in his eyes. He could ignore me. He could walk away. He could order security to escort me out. That would have been the old pattern, the old script, the one where he spoke and everyone fell in line. But too many people were watching. So, with an exaggerated sigh, he stomped over to the trash can. A few people laughed nervously, trying to make it all a joke, something to recount with amused horror later. Remember when Richard threw Emily's gift in the trash? God, what a night! He reached into the trash, pulled out the crushed box, bits of glittering paper clinging to the side, and shook it off with a grimace. He tore the envelope free from the top, shredded the flap with one rough motion, and opened the card. His eyes dropped to the handwriting inside. 1 second. By the time he finished the first line, his expression had already started to change. The arrogance drained away first. Then the irritation. Then something else seeped in. Something I'd never seen on his face in all the years of being his daughter. Fear. It was subtle. A tightening at the corners of his mouth. The slightest quiver in the hand holding the card. The way his eyes flicked up to me, then down again, as if looking directly at me might make what he was reading more real. Right on cue, the double doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. The room turned as one toward the entrance. My husband, Logan Pierce, walked in like this was his building. Broad-shouldered, clean-shaven, dark blue Armani suit that fit him like it had been stitched by someone who'd taken one look at him and said, "Okay, I get the assignment." White shirt, no tie. Calm, steady presence that rolled through the room like a quiet tide. He didn't rush. He didn't posture. He just walked. In his hand was a second envelope, pristine white, sealed and crisp. "Thought I'd deliver this myself," he said, voice low but carrying easily. His baritone slid through the ballroom with the confidence of a man who'd negotiated with CEOs and investors and didn't find this crowd particularly impressive. He reached the gift table, placed the envelope neatly among the other presents, and glanced at the overturned trash can with a raised eyebrow. "Since the first one nearly ended up with the plastic cups," he added. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Someone cleared their throat. The tension, already high, climbed another level. Richard's hands were trembling now. The card in his grip shook just enough that the edge of the paper fluttered. He looked at me again, but this time it wasn't the look of a man standing above his disappointment. It was the look of someone staring at a ghost who'd come back with receipts. Sophia pushed her chair back so quickly that her champagne flute tipped, clattering to the table, bubbles spilling onto the white linen. "What the hell is going on?" she asked, her voice cracking on the last word. There was less smugness now. More panic. More confusion. Like someone had swapped her script when she wasn't looking. I stepped forward, taking my time, each click of my heel echoing like a metronome in the quiet. I reached the gift table, picked up a fresh champagne flute, and let the cool glass rest between my fingers. Logan stood a step behind me, solid as a wall at my back. "That envelope," I said, nodding toward the one he'd just placed down, "is your wedding gift, Sophia. A fully paid honeymoon. Private villa in Santorini. Business class flights. 2 weeks. All inclusive." A sharp inhale swept through the crowd like someone had opened a window. Sophia's jaw dropped. Her maid of honor, Lila, let out a soft, involuntary "Whoa!" And the card Dad just read. I continued, turning slightly toward Richard. That was a check for Mom. $150,000. To pay off the second mortgage on the house. Another ripple moved through the room, this one jagged. Someone behind me whispered, "Second mortgage." Like the words themselves were scandalous enough to stain the polished floor. Richard's face went from white to gray. The color drained from him so completely he looked almost translucent. Catherine took a small step forward, her hand hovering near his arm like she wanted to steady him but couldn't bring herself to touch him. Her lips parted, but no words came out. I took a sip of champagne. Tasted expensive and slightly bitter. Fitting. "I figured you needed the help," I said calmly. "Since you've been bleeding money to keep up appearances." No one laughed this time. The string quartet still hadn't resumed playing. The violinist was staring openly now, bow frozen mid-air. A server carrying a tray of canapés had stopped halfway across the room, looking from me to Richard as if waiting for permission to move. The room was a powder keg, and I had just lit the fuse. This wasn't about applauding me. This wasn't about a dramatic apology scene where they fell to their knees and begged for forgiveness. I never expected that, and I wasn't interested in it. This was something else. This was me putting their masks on the table and walking away while everyone watched. I set my glass down on the nearest table, the faint clink echoing in the silence, and turned toward Logan. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. He just held out his hand. Took it. As we started to walk toward the doors, I heard the scrape of a chair behind me. Then another. Heels scuffed. A fork clinked against a plate. And then Catherine's voice, thin and strained. "Emily, wait. Please." I didn't stop. They had thrown me out like trash once. Tonight I wasn't walking out in shame. I was leaving on my terms. They could keep their chandeliers and velvet drapes and cold champagne. I had already built myself something better than any of this. 3 years earlier, I'd walked away from that family with nothing. Tonight I walked away having proved one simple thing. They'd underestimated the wrong daughter. We stepped into the hallway, the ballroom door easing shut behind us with a soft, heavy thud that felt more final than any slammed door. The quiet on the other side was almost startling. Just the muffled sounds of the hotel, distant footsteps, soft music from another room, the hum of air conditioning. My phone buzzed in my clutch. Then again. And again. By the time we reached the elevator, I glanced at the screen. 13 missed calls. 6 voicemails. Half a dozen texts. All from my mother. "Emily, please. Your father didn't mean it like that. Can we talk? Just call me. Please, Emily." I locked the screen and slipped the phone back into my bag. "Not yet." Logan pressed the elevator button, then looked at me. "You okay?" he asked quietly. I exhaled, realizing only then how tight my chest had been. "I thought I'd be shaking," I admitted. "I'm not." His hand slipped into mine, fingers warm and steady. "You were never the problem," he said. "They just didn't know what to do with someone who outgrew them." The elevator doors slid open. We stepped inside, the mirrored walls reflecting 2 completely different lives from the ones my parents had mapped out for me. The doors closed, and with them, the sound of the ballroom vanished. For a moment, it was just me, Logan, and the soft mechanical hum as we descended. I thought of the past, of how far I'd come, of the night this all really started. Not tonight. Not at the rehearsal dinner. But 3 years ago, under a very different sky. 3 years earlier, the air hadn't smelled like jasmine and chilled champagne. It had smelled like rain and cut grass and the kind of cold that comes from being unwanted. The Harper Mansion in River Oaks didn't look like a house that sadness lived in. From the outside it was perfection. A sprawling Tudor-style estate with ivy crawling up the stone walls, tall windows reflecting carefully manicured magnolia trees, and a driveway that curved just so, like it was posing for a magazine cover. People used to slow their cars as they passed, craning their necks to catch a better look. Some even took photos from the sidewalk. They never saw what was happening inside. That night, I stood at the edge of the driveway with a duffel bag slung over my shoulder, my 2008 Honda Civic idling behind me, engine rattling softly. My clothes, my sketchbooks, my tools, everything I could grab in one bag. The rest of my life stuffed into a trunk that didn't close properly unless you slammed it twice. The porch light cast a harsh yellow glow over the front steps, illuminating the doorway where my father stood. He didn't look like a dad in that moment. He looked like a judge delivering a sentence. "You've done enough damage," Richard said, one hand gripping the doorframe as if the house itself might lunge forward to keep me in place. His voice was flat, tired, angry. "Leave now. And don't expect a dime from us. Not ever again." I remember how those words felt. Not like a surprise. More like confirmation. Like a final stamp on something I'd already known but hadn't wanted to say out loud. Sophia was leaning against the white porch railing, one ankle crossed over the other. Her blonde hair twisted into a perfect blowout that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. She watched me the way you watch a show you've already seen and enjoyed. "You'll come crawling back," she said, her lips curving into a small, satisfied smile. "Don't worry. We'll try not to gloat when you do." I looked from her to the window beside the door. My mother stood there. Not outside with them. Not beside me. Half hidden behind the curtain, her hands twisted together. Her gaze fixed somewhere near my shoes, as if eye contact might somehow turn her to stone. She saw me. She just chose not to acknowledge that I was her child being thrown out. The sky rumbled in the distance. The smell of rain was already in the air, thick and heavy. I was 29. No job. No savings of my own, because any money I made had either been managed by my father or dismissed as something I'd waste. No safety net. Just a duffel bag, a car older than some of the interns at Dad's company, and a heart so bruised I could feel every beat like a fresh injury. My crime. Saying no. No to the arranged marriage my parents had meticulously lined up with the son of a petrochemical tycoon, a man whose family was intertwined with Harper Energy in a tangle of contracts and mutual obligations. No to joining Harper Energy as a glorified assistant in the family business, where my ideas would never see daylight and my job would be to look polished at corporate galas while Sophia climbed the ladder to her inevitable CEO coronation. No to a life where every decision I made was pre-approved by a man who didn't know how to love without controlling. They called it betrayal. Called it survival. When I turned away that night and walked down the driveway, duffel strap cutting into my shoulder, rain starting to drizzle onto the stone, my shoes slipping slightly on the slick surface, I told myself one thing. If they were willing to throw me away this easily, maybe I'd never belonged to them in the first place. I climbed into my Civic, shut the door, and sat there for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, watching the golden light from the house spill across the lawn. Then I put the car in gear and drove. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a destination. I just drove along Westheimer Road, past stores that were closing up for the night, past restaurants where couples were laughing over dessert, past a city that seemed completely uninterested in the fact that my life had detonated an hour earlier. I ended up in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner called Moonlight Eats, the kind of place that smelled like burnt coffee and fryer oil and comfort. The neon sign buzzed in flickering pink and blue, casting patches of color over the cracked asphalt. I parked under the light, killed the engine, and listened to the ticking of the cooling metal. For the first time since I left the house, I let myself breathe. Then I cried. Not loud, messy sobs that shook my whole body. Silent tears. The kind that burn as they build up behind your eyes, then fall slowly, one by one, leaving cool tracks down your cheeks. I don't know how long I sat there. At some point, there was a knock on the passenger window. I startled, wiping my face with the back of my hand, and turned. A woman stood there, late 30s maybe, dark hair pulled into a long braid down her back, wearing a Moonlight Eats apron over a faded t-shirt. She held a styrofoam cup in one hand. I rolled the window down a few inches. "You look like you could use this," she said softly, sliding the cup through the gap. The steam rose up, warm and familiar. "Coffee. On the house. We don't charge broken hearts." I let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Thank you," I whispered. "Name's Rosa," she said. "We're open all night if you need a real chair and 4 walls." I shook my head. "I'm okay." She gave me a look that said she didn't believe me, but she wasn't going to push. "Just don't stay out here all night without locking your doors," she added. "Houston's not as kind as it looks." She stepped back, gave me one more small, gentle smile, then went inside. I locked the doors, curled up in the back seat, pulled my duffel over my legs like a makeshift blanket, and stared up through the foggy glass at the humming neon sign until my eyes finally closed. That night, under that flickering pink glow, I made myself a promise. If I was going to rebuild my life, I was going to do it out of something they didn't own, didn't control, and couldn't take away from me. I reached into my bag, pulled out my old laptop, its corner still dented from when I dropped it on the kitchen floor 2 years earlier, and opened it. The screen flickered, then buzzed to life. I logged into my old Etsy account, the one I'd started in college on a whim. A few listings of wire-wrapped necklaces, beaded earrings, simple hand-stamped bracelets. The shop had been dormant for years, quietly waiting, like a door I'd closed and forgotten. Dad had always scoffed at it. "Hobbies don't pay bills," he'd say. "Especially not silly crafts." Maybe he was right. But hobbies could buy time. I took out my small box of tools, pliers, wire cutters, a handful of beads and leftover gemstone chips I'd smuggled out in the duffel, and set them on the passenger seat. I snapped new photos under the dim light of the overhead lamp, angling pieces carefully to catch the glow. I rewrote the descriptions, fingers moving faster as I went, explaining the inspiration behind each design, the story behind the stones. Then I clicked publish. It was almost dawn when the first notification pinged. One turquoise pendant. $45. Somewhere someone had looked at something I made and said, "Yes, I want that." It was small. It was everything. Another order came in 2 hours later. Then another. It didn't magically solve anything. I didn't suddenly have thousands in the bank. I was still a woman sleeping in her car in a diner parking lot. But for the first time in a long time, I felt something other than fear. I felt possibility. 6 months later, I wasn't sleeping in the car anymore. I'd moved into a tiny studio apartment in Montrose. Peeling paint, noisy neighbors, a shower that only had 2 settings, lukewarm and scalding, but it was mine. My name on the lease. My keys on the hook by the door. The Etsy shop had grown beyond that. I'd registered an LLC, Harper Designs. My jewelry had evolved from simple dorm room pieces into something more intricate, more intentional. I worked with recycled metals, ethically sourced gemstones, designs inspired by magnolia petals, bayou reeds, and constellations I'd stared up at from the roof of my apartment building. Orders came in from all over the country. Texas, Oregon, New York, Florida. 48 states in the first year. I hired my first part-time assistant, a college student named Jasmine who came in 3 afternoons a week to help with packaging and shipping. Then a second, Maria, who handled emails and custom requests. Then a third, Dev, who built me a proper website and helped me figure out how to stop doing inventory on sticky notes. I worked 18-hour days. My fingers were covered in tiny scars from soldering. My eyes burned from late nights hunched over a workbench. My back ached constantly. But every time I walked into that small rented workspace and flipped on the lights, I felt something I had never felt walking into my father's company offices. Ownership. Then, one morning in 2023, I almost didn't go to the Small Business Expo. I'd signed up months earlier, paid the booth fee, designed a banner and printed little business cards with Harper Designs in soft gold lettering. But that week had been chaos. A supplier delayed a shipment of silver wire. A big custom order had gone wrong and needed to be remade. I hadn't slept more than 2 hours at a time in days. I stared at the email reminder on my phone, hair still wet from a rushed shower, and seriously considered staying home. But something in me said go. So I packed up my display pieces, earrings on driftwood stands, necklaces laid out on cream velvet, rings arranged on tiny ceramic dishes, loaded them into my Civic, which still rattled but now had a new radio, and drove downtown to the George R. Brown Convention Center. The expo hall was a chaos of banners, folding tables, and hopeful faces. Coffee carts steamed in the corners. People in name tags walked around clutching tote bags stuffed with flyers they'd probably never look at again. My booth was a simple folding table with a black cloth, a banner hanging a little crooked because I hadn't measured properly, and my jewelry laid out as neatly as I could manage. By midday, my feet hurt, my voice was hoarse, and I'd sold exactly 4 pieces. I was considering packing up early when a man stopped at my table. He wasn't flashy. No loud watch, no overly polished persona. Just a dark button-down shirt, dark jeans, and the kind of posture that said he was comfortable in any room. He picked up one of my necklaces, a silver pendant shaped like a magnolia petal, with a small moonstone set in the center, and held it up to the light. "This is beautiful," he said. "Thank you," I replied automatically, the way I had to everyone else. He turned the pendant over, examining the details. "How do you get this kind of precision with this level of equipment?" he asked, nodding toward my modest setup. I hesitated. I could have given him some polished line. Instead, I told him the truth. "I made that design for the first time in the back seat of my car," I said, "with a butane torch and a pair of pliers. I've upgraded a little since then, but not much." He looked up at me, eyes sharp, interested. Not in a predatory way, but like he was putting pieces of a puzzle together. "You were living in your car?" he asked, quietly enough that no one else would hear. "For a bit," I said. "I got thrown out. Long story." He nodded once. "Then you're probably the most relentless person in this whole building," he said. He bought 3 pieces. Not out of pity. Out of genuine appreciation. We talked a bit more. About business, about scaling, about the nightmare of shipping logistics. He asked questions about my margins and lead times that told me he'd been around more than a few startups. It wasn't until he handed me his card that I realized who he was. Logan Pierce. The Logan Pierce. The guy who just sold his cybersecurity startup for $12 million and was on the cover of a local business magazine that month under the headline, "The Quiet Architect of Digital Fortresses." I'd seen the article, mostly because the magazine had been sitting in Rose's diner the last time I'd stopped in. I blinked down at the card. "You're mentoring women-owned businesses now?" "Yes. Trying to," he said. "Some of them don't want help." "Why not?" "Pride. Fear. Bad experiences with men in suits." I shrugged. "I get it. And me?" I asked before I could stop myself. "Do I look like I want help?" He studied me for a second, not in a way that made my skin crawl, in a way that made me feel seen. "I think you look like someone who's done a lot with very little," he said, "and someone who could do even more with the right support. But I'm not going to force anything on you." He slid a second card across the table. "If you ever want to talk about scaling," he added, "give me a call." I didn't call him that day. I did email him a week later. 6 months after that. We were eating takeout on the floor of my studio, surrounded by half-finished pieces and shipping boxes, laughing about a client who tried to haggle down the price on a custom necklace by offering exposure. 8 months later, we were standing barefoot on a quiet beach in Galveston, the wind tangling my hair, a justice of the peace reading vows over the sound of waves. No guests, no flowers, no orchestra, no family. Just us and the sound of the ocean, and the ring he slid onto my finger, a thin band of white gold with 3 tiny diamonds, clean and simple and exactly right. I didn't send my parents an invitation. I didn't tell them it was happening. They had made their choice long before I made mine. Life became something new after that. Softer in some ways, sharper in others. I still worked hard, still burned the candle at both ends more often than Logan liked. But the work felt different with someone beside me who believed in what I was building and didn't try to control it. Then, one ordinary Tuesday, the past arrived in my mailbox. I came home from the studio to find a cream envelope with gold calligraphy tucked among the junk mail and catalogs. My name, written in a hand I recognized from countless Christmas cards and birthday invitations. My Aunt Vivian. The only member of the Harper family who hadn't fully turned her back on me. Inside was a thick card, embossed and elegant. You are cordially invited to celebrate the rehearsal dinner of Sophia Harper and Ethan Caldwell. I stared at it for a long time. Part of me wanted to rip it in half and throw it in the trash. Part of me wanted to laugh at the audacity. They'd thrown me out like I was nothing. Now they wanted me at their shining event as what? An ornament. Proof that they were generous enough to let the wayward daughter back into the fold. Logan walked into the kitchen, loosened his tie, and reached for a glass. "What's that?" he asked. I handed him the card. He read it once, then again, then set it down carefully. "You should go," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "So they can act like nothing happened. So they can pretend I'm lucky to be allowed in the room." "No," he said, meeting my eyes. "So they can see what you did without them." I looked at the card again. My stomach twisted. Fear. Anger. Old hurt that never fully healed. But beneath that, something else. Clarity. "I don't want to go there just to show off," I said. "That's not me." "I know," he replied. "That's why you're the only one who can walk in there without needing their reaction. You're not going to prove anything to them. You're going to remind yourself that they don't get to define you anymore." We talked for hours that night. About boundaries. About what I owed them. About what I didn't. In the end, I decided to go. Not as the girl who'd been kicked out. As the woman who had built something solid without their money, their approval, or their name. The gifts were Logan's idea at first. "If you're going to walk into their world," he said, "walk in on your terms." He pulled up flight packages, villa rentals, honeymoon itineraries. We picked Santorini together, a place with blue domes and white walls and sunsets that looked like someone had set the sky on fire. The honeymoon package wasn't cheap. But I could afford it. 'Cause I had built something real. The check for my mother took longer. $150,000. Money I knew they needed because Vivian, in an unguarded moment, had let slip that Richard had taken out a second mortgage on the house, refinancing to keep Harper Energy afloat and Sophia living the life of an heiress while the foundations crumbled. For Catherine, the card read, "To ease the burden you never shared. Emily." I didn't add anything else. No lectures. No guilt trips. Just the truth. The night of the rehearsal dinner, I put on a deep emerald dress that hugged my waist, let my dark hair fall in soft waves over my shoulders, and clasped one of my own pieces around my neck. A sapphire pendant in a simple silver setting. Logan looked at me for a moment, then smiled. "You look like someone walking into a room she already owns," he said. "I feel like I'm walking into a room I already survived," I replied. He drove us to the Magnolia Grand in his Tesla, Houston's skyline glittering outside the windows. The radio played low, some indie playlist he'd made for long drives. I stared out at the city that had watched me at my lowest and now watched me at my strongest. By the time we pulled up to the valet, my nerves had settled into something sharper. Focus. We walked in together. His hand warm at the small of my back. You already know what happened inside. The throne gift. The insult. The laughter. The card. Logan's entrance. The reveal. The gasp of the crowd. Brexit. What happened after that was quieter. On the drive home, my phone buzzed over and over, but I ignored it. When we pulled into our driveway in Bel Air, a modern sunlit house with big windows, an open kitchen, and a small studio out back where I could design whenever inspiration struck, I sat on the porch steps for a moment, letting the night air cool my skin. "I thought going back there would make me feel small again," I said. "And?" Logan asked. I looked up at him. "It didn't," I said. "It made them look small." He sat beside me, our shoulders touching. For a few minutes, we just watched the streetlights flicker on, one by one. Then my phone buzzed again. I finally checked the notifications. 13 missed calls from Mom. 6 voicemails. 1 text from Sophia. The wedding venue deposit bounced. "Did you do something? We're screwed. Call me if you still care at all." I stared at the words. The last sentence. "If you still care at all." I felt laughter bubble up in my chest. Not joyful, not cruel. Just incredulous. "She thinks I sabotaged the deposit," I said, handing the phone to Logan. He scanned the message, his expression darkening. Classic deflection, he said. Something's wrong, so they look for the closest scapegoat. You. I didn't touch anything, I said quietly. He squeezed my hand. I know. And deep down they know too. But it's easier to blame the daughter who stopped playing their game than to admit they built everything on a foundation of lies and bad decisions. Pocketed the phone. That night I slept deeply. No replay of old arguments. No new anxiety spirals. Just rest. The next morning I woke up with one clear thought. I needed to go back to the house. Not for them. For me. For something they still had that belonged to me long before they decided I wasn't worth investing in. The cedar chest in the attic. My grandmother's chest. I drove to River Oaks alone. The mansion didn't look like it had 3 years ago. The lawn was still trimmed, but not as precise. The magnolia trees needed pruning. The hedges had grown a little wild, like no one had time to care anymore. Signs of a life stretched thin. I parked at the curb, turned off the engine, and sat there for a moment watching the front door. Then I got out and walked up the path. I knocked. After a delay that felt longer than it probably was, the door opened. Richard stood there. Without the tuxedo. Without the rehearsed posture. He looked older. There were deeper lines around his eyes, a pallor to his skin. His hair, once always neatly cut and styled, was slightly out of place. Emily, he said, my name catching on his tongue. I didn't expect. I'm not staying, I said, cutting him off gently but firmly. I just want something from the attic. His eyes narrowed slightly. What? Mom's old cedar chest, I said. The one you always said was junk. The one with my name on the bottom. His mouth tightened. That's not yours, he said reflexively. I tilted my head. Then why did Mom write Emily on it in Sharpie when I was 10? Yes. You probably thought I didn't see her do it. I did. Behind him I heard soft footsteps. Catherine appeared in the hallway, her face bare of makeup, eyes swollen and red like she hadn't slept. I told you, she said quietly to him. Then to me. I told him we should have given it to you years ago. Too late for that now, I said. I'm just here to take what's mine. Then I'll be gone. They didn't move to stop me. I stepped past them, the familiarity of the house hitting me in layers. The citrus cleaner smell, the faint perfume, the creak in the third stair, the family photos lining the corridor in carefully curated frames. Sophia as a toddler. Sophia at her first recital. Sophia at graduation. A few of me, sprinkled in like afterthoughts. I went up to the attic, the air growing warmer and dustier as I climbed. The cedar chest sat under a stained sheet, tucked against the far wall. It was old, the carvings worn, the brass hardware tarnished, but the moment I pulled the sheet away, the scent of cedar and old paper hit me like a memory. I knelt beside it, pulled a screwdriver from my bag. Force of habit. A designer always has tools, and pried the lock gently until it gave. The lid creaked as it opened. Inside were pieces of my childhood I'd thought were long gone. Sketchbooks filled with pencil drawings of jewelry designs I'd made when I was 13, 14, 15. Necklaces inspired by constellations. Earrings shaped like falling leaves. Rings that looked like tiny vines wrapped around a finger. A journal from when I was 16. Pages crammed with dreams about moving to New York, studying design, starting my own brand. Letters I'd written to myself because sometimes there was no one else to talk to. Keep going. One day you'll leave. You're not crazy for wanting more. I flipped through them, smiling once, then feeling my throat tighten. Then I saw it. A sealed envelope. Yellowed slightly with age. My name written on the front in a familiar looping script. Nana's handwriting. I'd recognize it anywhere. My grandmother Eleanor had been the only one who ever truly encouraged my art. She'd let me sit at her kitchen table for hours, spreading beads and wire and sketches everywhere, bringing me cups of tea and telling me stories about women in our family who'd been bold in their own quiet ways. She'd died 10 years earlier. I'd always thought she'd left me nothing but memories. I ripped the envelope open carefully, fingers trembling. Inside was a letter. And a check. $75,000. Dated 2013. Made out to me. In the letter, she'd written, "Emily, your parents think you're too reckless to handle this, but I've watched you long enough to know better. Use this to build your dreams. Go to design school if you want. Start your business. Travel. Learn. Fall down and get up again. Don't let them dim your fire because it makes them uncomfortable. Love always. Nana." I stared at the date. 10 years. 10 years this money had sat up here. Untouched. 10 years during which my parents had looked me in the eye and told me design school was unrealistic and too expensive, that there was no money for frivolous dreams, that I should be grateful for the opportunity to join Harper Energy instead. They had let me think I was irresponsible for wanting more. They had let me believe that I was asking for too much. They had let me sleep in my car when they knew full well that there had been money set aside for me all along. They hadn't forgotten this. They had hidden it. On purpose. I stood up, the envelope clenched in my hand, and walked back downstairs. They were waiting in the hallway, side by side. Richard looked at the envelope first. Then at my face. "What's that?" he asked, but his voice was thin. I handed it to him. He opened it. At first he didn't react. Then his eyes landed on the date. His shoulders sagged slightly. We didn't think you were ready," he said, the excuse tumbling out of him like it had been rehearsed. And maybe it had. "No," I said, my voice steady, sharpening with each word. "You didn't think I was worth it." He flinched. Catherine's hand flew to her mouth. I stepped back. "I built my life without this," I said. "Without you. Without your money. Without your permission. You could have helped me when I was young and terrified and begging you to let me try. You chose not to. That's on you. Not me." I walked to the door. "This time," I added, turning back for a brief moment, "when I leave, it won't be because you threw me out. It'll be because I decided you don't get a front row seat to what I've built." Then I walked out. And I didn't look back. The day of Sophia's wedding dawned quiet. No frantic calls. No apology messages. No desperate attempts to pull me back into their orbit. I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd accepted it. Accepted that I wasn't coming to save them. Around noon, Logan's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. He glanced at it, frowned, then handed it to me without speaking. On the screen was a text. "Do you think she'll show?" It was from Sophia. To her wedding planner. Accidentally sent to Logan, because apparently my sister still hadn't mastered the art of double-checking who she was texting. She hadn't reached out to me. She was venting about me. Asking, not with hope, but with entitlement, whether I'd make an appearance at the big event. I handed the phone back to Logan, unbothered. "They still haven't changed," I said. "They're not sorry. They're just scared." He studied me for a moment. "I think you should go," he said. I stared at him. "To the wedding." "Not for them," he said. "For you. You walked through hell to get here, Emily. You don't need their recognition. But maybe it's time to walk into their world one more time as the woman you are now. And then walk back out because you choose to, not because they force you." He was right. Again. So I didn't put on some power suit or dramatic black dress designed to say, "Look how untouchable I am." I didn't need to scream to be heard. I chose a soft gold gown, simple and elegant, the fabric falling in clean lines. My hair was swept up, a few loose strands framing my face. I wore a pair of pearl earrings from my own collection, small and luminous. We arrived at the Houstonian Hotel as the pre-ceremony photos were being taken in the garden. String lights hung from the trees. White chairs lined the lawn. Flower petals had been scattered down the aisle in careful handfuls. The air was thick with perfume, nerves, and the fake laughter that comes with trying to look perfect in pictures. People noticed me the moment we stepped onto the path. Whispers. Sideways glances. An aunt elbowing another relative and nodding in my direction. Sophia stood near a rosebush, her gown a cloud of tulle and lace, her veil pinned just so, makeup flawless. She was laughing at something one of her new in-laws had said. A bright, brittle sound. "Melanie." I said once in my head by mistake, thinking of the competitor script you showed me earlier. But this was not Melanie. This was my sister, Sophia. My story. My life. Sophia, I called out. She turned. For 1 second, she looked like a little girl again, surprised to see her big sister at the edge of the playground. Emily, she said, blinking. I didn't think you'd actually come. I'm not here to make a scene, I said. I'm just here to drop something off. I handed her a small envelope. Not sealed. No tricks. Inside was a neatly printed copy of Nana's letter. Just the letter, not the check. Proof. Read it when you're alone, I said. You deserve to know what else they kept from you. Her jaw tightened. She didn't say thank you. She didn't say anything. Just stared at the envelope like it might explode. I turned to leave. Before I could take more than a few steps, the microphone at the small platform crackled to life. Excuse me, a voice said. Richard stood there, holding the mic in both hands. His suit looked a little too big on him now. His shoulders seemed less broad. His tie was slightly crooked. I'd like to say a few words before we begin, he said, voice shaking. A murmur rippled through the guests. Someone tried to tug him gently away from the mic, whispering that this wasn't the time. He brushed them off. I was wrong, he said. The words hung in the air like something fragile. Not just as a father, he continued, but as a man who convinced himself that control was the same thing as love. He looked toward me, then toward Sophia, then down at the floor. I threw away something priceless, he said. Someone priceless. The garden went completely silent. My daughter Emily built a life I didn't believe was possible, he said. I told myself I was protecting her by pushing her toward what I understood. By forcing her into the mold I thought she should fit. The truth is, I was afraid. Afraid she'd do more than I'd ever done. Afraid she didn't need me. He swallowed hard. I hid things, he said, the admission shaking loose. From both my daughters. Emily's inheritance from Eleanor, and Sophia, your trust fund. A bouquet hitting the ground with a soft thud. Sophia's eyes went wide. What trust fund? She demanded, stepping forward, the letter I'd given her still clutched in her hand. Catherine moved to the front, tears streaming freely now. Your grandmother left you both money, she said, her voice cracking. We redirected it. To the business. To keep Harper Energy afloat. We thought we'd turn it around. We thought we'd pay it back before you ever needed it. The truth spilled out, Harper Energy had been hemorrhaging money for years. Bad investments. Risky deals. Loans stacked on top of loans. Refinance after refinance. The mansion. The vacations. The image of wealth. All of it built on debt. All of it paid, at least in part, with the money meant to give me a future. Me. And Sophia. The bounced venue deposit suddenly made sense. Counts frozen. Creditors circling. The perfect Harper image, held together with duct tape and denial. I stepped closer, but I didn't take the mic. I didn't need amplification. We all come from something, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Some of us come from houses like this. Some of us come from nothing. But there comes a point where you have to decide whether you're going to let where you came from decide where you're allowed to go. I looked at Sophia. I hope your marriage is built on truth, I said softly. Not pressure. Not image. Just love. You deserve that much. She stared at me, eyes shining with a storm of emotions. Hurt, anger, confusion, maybe, somewhere in there, understanding. She gave the smallest nod. Turned. Walked back to Logan. We left the garden the way we'd come. No shouting. No dramatic last words. No slammed gates. Just the steady rhythm of my footsteps and the quiet certainty that, this time, I was walking away by choice. Later that night, we sat on the back porch of our Bel Air home. The sky streaked in orange and pink as the sun sank low. The cicadas buzzed in the trees. The air was warm but gentle. Logan handed me a mug of tea, then settled beside me. You did it, he said. I didn't do anything, I replied. They did. He shook his head slightly. You told the truth, he said. Out loud. In front of everyone. And then you walked away. That's not nothing. My phone buzzed on the table between us. Text from Sophia. I didn't know about the trust fund. I didn't know about Nana's letter. I'm leaving for Santorini tomorrow. When I get back, can we talk? I stared at the message for a long time. I'm not ready, I said quietly. You don't have to be, Logan replied. You don't owe anyone access to you just because they suddenly realized your value. Put the phone face down. The stars began to appear, one by one, faint at first, then clearer as the sky darkened. Harper Designs kept growing. My pieces appeared in fashion blogs, then in magazines. A stylist pulled a bracelet for a celebrity event. Orders spiked. Hired more staff. Opened a small showroom. Sometimes I thought about that check in Nana's envelope. I hadn't needed it to build my business. But the betrayal it represented, that had been a different kind of fuel. A week after the wedding, Aunt Vivian called. She caught me between meetings, her voice soft and hesitant. Your father checked himself into rehab, she said. Stress, alcohol, maybe guilt. Your mother's meeting with lawyers about selling the house. They're dismantling everything they built. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. Felt relieved. Relieved that I had gotten out when I did. Relieved that I hadn't tied my entire future to a sinking ship. Relieved that the outcomes of their choices were finally theirs to deal with, not mine to fix. I didn't build my life out of spite. Spite may have lit the first match the night I opened Etsy back up, but it wasn't what kept the fire going. What kept it going was something bigger. The quiet belief that I was worth more than the role they'd written for me. So to every daughter who's ever been called a burden at her own sister's celebration, to every girl who's been told to sit down, shut up and stop dreaming, to everyone who's been thrown out for daring to say no, hear me. You don't have to scream to rise. You don't have to destroy yourself to keep the peace. You don't have to spend your whole life paying for a seat at a table that was never set for you in the first place. You just have to keep going. Even when no one claps. Even when no one believes you. Even when you're sleeping in your car outside a 24-hour diner with a cracked phone and a handful of tools. One day they might see you. They might finally understand what you were worth all along. But by then, you won't need them to. I'm Emily Harper. They tried to break me. I built myself instead.